my discussion this evening is very similar to Collin's in some sense, and I will give you an economist's take of this contract and what we can expect and so on. But before I do that, I'd like to say that I'm basically going to be summarizing points I've made over the years in Starbuck News since 2009. I'm going to be repeating themes that I always believe, some of which overlap with Colin's presentation. And these themes are coming from my academic research, from my writings in Starbuck News, and my experience in Guyanese politics. I've actually been involved. I'm kind of a retired Guyanese politician now. You might not know that, but I've been involved in Guyanese politics back in the 90s as a youth. I think it's important though that before I talk about can we circumvent, can we escape the natural resource curse, it's important for me to clarify a little bit what economists do, because I'm proud of a few things, my family and so on. But tonight I'd like to emphasize that I'm very proud of my columns in Starbuck News. I hope you read them. and I'm very proud of the economics profession. I don't think we get it's fully understood what we do, and it's a very important profession. And economists have invented many things. You don't think about it, but many of the things you take for granted have actually been ideas that are put into management decisions and so on, in government and in private sector. These things were invented by economists. So basically what we do, we act like insurance companies in a sense, right? We have to decide what your monthly premium will be, okay? That's essentially what many times economists will do. Many life events involve a probability. There's a probability that you walk out there and you get hit by a car. There's a probability driving home, certain things might happen, your house will burn. And essentially, economists have to take that likelihood, that probability, it usually takes 0, it's not going to happen, to 1, it is going to happen, and multiply that by some outcome, some dollar amount, right? Which we call the expected value. So yes, in many ways, these writings and this presentation will make speculation, but all speculations are probabilistic, right? And I can tell you that I'd like to say clearly that my speculations here this evening, the odds are a lot better than your casino odds, trust me. What we do, I'll give you one example of a recent invention by economists. Before I go on, I'm sorry, bear with me. There is a problem in the United States, and that is, how do we efficiently allocate kidneys and hearts and so on, livers and so on? Lots of people were dying, right? And what we need was a kind of a matching market mechanism to efficiently match heart to somebody who really needs it. And it was an economist who solved that problem, okay? And so that's an invention, by the way. And this is the point that I made at the CB conference a few days ago, because it's a technology. That's a technology. A technology is not a gadget. It's really the idea. It's the management skills, the idea. How do we do it? And I would go as far as saying that a technology, you can have a social technology, and this is not in the literature. I hope my colleagues don't hear what I'm saying here, but it's not in the literature. But I'd go as far as saying a constitutional overhaul is a social technology, which dovetails with the point you were making earlier. All right? Having said that, let me get into my presentation. So this thing called natural resource curse, basically economists have been talking about this for donkey years, and it turns out that it's now, we in Guyana, we're going to be faced by this natural resource curse. It's basically a statistical regularity, and it says that in general, a nation with limited natural resources tend to do better on development outcomes and democratic outcomes compared with those who have less natural resources, okay? This is the basic idea. It's a statistical regularity, and like every statistical regularity, there are exceptions, there are errors. Any statistical model will have errors. We cannot know everything. We are not God. So we are trying to find the truth by observing numbers, data. And some of those exceptions, it's not something that will be inevitable, and I'm hoping that discussions like this evening, all these writings that we have done, myself, Chris have done, and Chris have been doing it many more years before me. I've only started in 2009 writing columns, Raymond, and I'm hoping that all these discussions will eventually help this country and will filter through to our two main political parties, right? And I know there are probably guys like there will be change, but it will take a long time for the guys coming back with their masters and so on from good schools and so on before they can really make a difference. But these things it take time. But I'm just saying that we have to keep talking about them, right? So yeah, I mean, Norway is the poster child for the natural resource success story, and perhaps Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Botswana, which is one of my favorite case studies when I look at Botswana. It's a very interesting country. It was in my sample in the discussion, in an innovation sample that I discussed a few days ago. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago, which is a mixed bag, actually, from an innovation standpoint. And if there's anything we can do, we really need to study Trinidad carefully to not make some of the mistakes that they have made with their natural resource wealth, okay? So, well, the natural resource curse takes different manifestations. It shows up differently. So, for example, the popular one, which is now, a lot of Guyanese have heard about this one, and the Dutch disease. And, the Dutch disease is related to the exchange rate. I'm not going to go over this because a lot of people are now familiar with this one, but deindustrialization is also a problem of a natural resource curse, because if we focus too much on just exporting crude oil, you can actually have a deindustrialization. So I'm hopeful that your modular thing will become a reality. It's very important from an industrialization standpoint. And there's evidence for this. But I think the biggest problem is probably the lack of innovation. If we throw back and say, well, we don't have to worry too much. Society has got to innovate, this kind of Schumpeterian creative destruction process. And actually, I should say, my fear, I said innovation. Innovation is really important. It's the mother's milk, right, of economic growth, right? Economists will tell you it's really innovation that drives the trend in the long run. And when I'm talking long run, I'm talking since independence, right? Because we have a major problem. We are always mixing up the cycle and the trend, okay? So my fear is this oil thing coming up, and Collin talks about the expectations, There's a lot of expectation of this big bonanza coming, And we're going to postpone fundamental reforms, and that's a problem, right? We're going to kick a lot of things down the road, right? And Trinidad is the same thing, by the way. And of course, Baumol's cost disease. I should talk a little bit about that tonight, because it's a phenomenon akin to Baumol's cost disease, and it basically says that this is how it works. The success in the export oil sector will lead to an increase in the cost of production for other sectors of the economy. That's where the cost disease comes from. It's a spillover of costs. Right? So as a matter of fact, Norway has this problem. This is one of the ways, although they've been able to manage their affairs brilliantly, they have a kind of Baumol cost disease situation playing out, right? You should look it up, the Baumol cost disease. What it basically means, cost spillovers. Wages start to rise in other sectors faster than productivity, which means they're not as competitive in export markets and so on, and within the domestic economy. So, can we escape this resource curse? Well, I think it depends on about 3 factors, and I'm going to outline them tonight. It's my opinion. How much money will Guyana really receive? As you can see, there's a lot of disagreements here. I, um, I think Melinda's presentation was fantastic, but I have a slightly more optimistic view of how much money we're going to get, although with a high variance, right? My mean is going to have a high variance attached to it, and this is really the problem. When you have a lot of expectations from the population, pent-up expectations, of course, and our leaders are telling people we're going to do fine and so on, and when that is coupled with wide swings in revenues, the actual revenues coming. Some years it's going to be really good, and some years it's not going to be that good, right? And how do you maintain that stable spending? It's usually maintained by debt, all right? And especially internationally, foreign currency debt. That's a serious problem, okay? So it depends on, of course, as you know, any business person will tell you, or anyone who studied accounting or economics will tell you, this will all depend on, it depends on the unit cost of production, the market price, and the quantity of barrels pumped, right? It depends, as Collin said a few minutes ago. With respect to cost, I'd like to say the contract did not clearly specify the time when cost recovery ends, or the price conditions of cost recovery. And again, I'd like to urge you guys, like Melinda did a few minutes ago, please read Annex C, Article 12 and Article 13. And it's really, when I read those articles, then I realize how nebulous, how unclear, the specification and the limits on costs, recurring or recovering costs is. And this is really, I think the contract has two fatal problems, or two major problems. The cost side is not tied down well, and the environmental spill issue. It's a major problem. There is a probability, right, that we could have a spill. Honestly, I haven't looked at it. I don't know what the actuarial or probabilistic estimates are, but the probability is not zero. Anyone who is telling you there's just zero probability for a spill is lying. There's a probability of a spill. And so that's a big problem. The environment and this cost of the failure to tie down the cost side of the equation is a big problem. I'm not going to write the equation here tonight. I toyed with that. There's a simple equation, but I'm not going to write it. It's in the interest of the oil company to actually push some costs forward, right? And when I read Annex C, because I'm trained as an economist, one of the things that popped out to me is something called, for you engineers in the room, something called a differential equation, right? For us, a difference equation. And I can see a difference equation built into the contract, right? So once you push costs down, the cost keeps recurring. It's a recursive equation, as the mathematicians will tell you, right? So this is why one of the things that I hope our political leaders will start thinking along the line is these problems are not only geologic problems, right? These problems are financial problems, scientific and economic. If I were reading this contract and advising this government, I would tell them, look at this, the equation popped into my head right away, reading it, right? So, and I can visualize it from an equation standpoint, how this 0.75 to 75% cap, how it will lead to recurring costs into the future. So what it does, it pushes up the average or the unit cost, which means Guyana, the profit oil diminishes. I'm not saying Guyana will not get money. Guyana will get money, and I have some estimates which I presented in the first decade. I'm expecting revenues to swing on per year, with a probability, of course, between 180 million to 1.4 billion. That's a huge variance, right? And if, let's say, we are constantly spending now $1 billion per year, right? You see the problem, right? If this swing, right? So this is a technical problem, and I hope this government and whoever wins in 2020, and that's another discussion, by the way, they're going to seriously, this is a technocratic endeavor, and and we've got to manage our destiny. As a professor, the Communist Party of China is perhaps the most technocratic government on the planet, right? And these are engineering, these are mathematical, these are economic problems. And these politicians can't do it. I can put my head on a block, they can't do it, right? So I will continue. All right. Well, the second condition is how well will Guyana spend these funds, right? How well? Well, think about it. Think about our history of governance, right? You know, Guyana government now is tasked with collecting this oil revenue and deciding how to spend it, right? So our government is now the conduit of development, right? If you think about it, right? Because these funds are not going to the private sector, you know. They're going to go to the government, and the government decides what to do with it. Well, you let history be the guide. And this goes back to my strong belief that, you know, we got to take responsibility. And I am not discounting, you know. I'm not discounting foreign intervention and all this kinds of stuff, of course. I mean, I'm very familiar with Guyana history. As a matter of fact, I published a paper called The Colonial Origins of Guyana's Underdevelopment. You should look it up, right? So I'm very familiar, but I have studied enough case studies where people like Mauritius, right, Botswana, right, Singapore, right, Barbados, right, have taken their destinies in their hands and have come out better. So I am Gen X, right? It really depends on the government. Again, it depends, right? So the government will have to decide what to do with it. So it depends on the government's capacity and the capacity of the civil service, right? So if the government is the conduit of development, well, it depends on the elected officials who, I hope, will have this regular democratic turnover. The democratic process will churn, and you don't do well, you're out. You know, let's keep trying different things. But that's that. And then after that layer of elected officials, we now have the civil service, right? And this is going to be fundamental for whether we escape the resource course, because, you know, you're going to need the people to come up with the technocratic estimates of where best to allocate the funds and so on, like the MITI of Japan or the Shables of working with the government in South Korea back in the days and so on, right? The kind of, you know, you study the civil service in Mauritius, it's quite amazing. Study the Mauritian civil service, a very interesting organization, right? The civil service is extremely important, right? So these are terms that are in our development economics literature. Will the government be developmental? Will it be semi-developmental? Or should it be predatory? Well, you know, a developmental government is one which has this meritocratic system. It has a very efficient civil service. It is what Peter Evans called embedded autonomy, meaning the civil service is embedded in the economy. They know the needs of the economy, but yet they are autonomous not to take bribes. They're incorruptible, right? Let me repeat, a developmental government or developmental state is one which has the features of embedded autonomy. So the civil service is embedded. They know the country, they know the geography, they know the history, they understand the conflicts, they understand the science and the finance and all these things, right? That's what embeddedness means, right? But yet, they are autonomous. They're autonomous from corruption, and they are autonomous from government intervention. Like, you need an independent central bank. A country needs an independent central bank. Yes, I mean, I understand when you get to the global level, but we still control our destinies with our central banks. And I have this compensation hypothesis. I told you guys I published a book, and the whole thing is basically working out the math, how this thing could work, right, in reality. So, we have to be able to take care of our destinies, right? And so it's not just, the civil service. So a predatory government, of course, is one where the civil service breaks down. It's susceptible to bribes and corruption and so on, right? And you could have semi-predatory governments where, you have churns in democracies, but you still have some corruption. They get some things right and they get some things wrong. I'm not going to name any countries tonight, but if you want to get the case studies, read Peter Evans. He names them, and I'm not going to do that tonight, but I'm relying on Peter Evans here with these terms. But I thought I should define what a developmental state really is. And so to summarize this point then, if we are going to escape the resource curse or circumvent it, we're going to need a developmental state, right? Perhaps a semi-one, but the best scenario would be a developmental state, right? And developmental states can be found in Mauritius, Singapore, the old South Korean government, the Japanese Métis, and those are some examples. And the third factor would be, will there be fundamental institutional reforms, particularly constitutional overhaul? And notice I stopped using the term constitutional reform. This constitution ain't want reforming, This thing you gotta have a complete overhaul. This thing needs fundamental change, right? A few minutes ago, the list system came up. That list system is a terrible system, right? How can we vote for a list that is decided from the top? I'm sorry, my friend. It's a terrible system, right? So this is what I mean by constitutional overhaul. Deep electoral changes, right? I'll probably explain this some more in the next slide, what I mean by electoral changes. And of course, you need a civil service reform. You need a developmental civil service, right? Right? So why are these things needed? We have to be able to take our main problems and what I coined in a paper I published in 2016 called strategic pro-ethnic voting. Strategic voting is a term that is in political science literature, but what I did, I'm the first person to actually take this idea from political science and bring it into the economics literature and apply it to a model called the prisoner's dilemma. So how it works is basically, somebody mentioned a few minutes ago that Guyana is caught in a trap, and they're absolutely right. This person is absolutely right. The trap is called the prisoner's dilemma. Let me try to explain what the prisoner's dilemma really is, right? And I would like to make it clear that LAPHOP polls show that about 85% of Guyanese do vote strategically, not all Guyanese. So if you're here tonight and you are the person, you're looking at the policies, you read the manifestos or the action plan, and you're voting according to that, you're not a strategic voter, right? A strategic voter is someone, according to the political science literature, who votes not because they love their party, they vote because they want to keep the other side out, right? That's a strategic voter, right? Because you perceive that, from the prisoner's dilemma side now, you perceive that your economic interest, whatever that may be, a job in the civil service or a contract or something, will be best taken care of by your political party, right? Make sense? That's what I mean by strategic voting, right? So what's this prisoner's dilemma? Well, it was actually invented by some guys at the Rand Corporation back in the Cold War, and they wanted to model how the Soviet Union will respond to the US with missile proliferation. So the Soviet Union had two strategies. Should we just build missiles, or should we not build missiles? And the United States, those are exactly its two strategies. Should we build a lot of missiles, or should we not build missiles? Now, obviously the world is a much better place if both sides don't build missiles. So you ask yourself, well, why don't they? Let's not build nuclear missiles. You can destroy the whole planet. Well, what is the reason why both the United States and the Soviet Union decided to build missiles? The answer is obvious, because you don't know how the other person will operate. That is the prisoner's dilemma. So while if they were able to cooperate and understand the other side and read and say, here, man, look, this thing is bad for the world. Let's not build up nuclear missiles. Well, you would get the optimum outcome, which is no missile, what we call the Nash equilibrium, and the Beautiful Mind, the guy from the Beautiful Mind movie, right? You get the Nash equilibrium, right? So, on the other hand, you don't know what the Soviets are going to do. You can't be naive and not build your missile. And so everybody started building missiles, and the world became a very unsafe place, and that is what is called the prisoner's dilemma. I'm not going to get into why it was called prisoner's dilemma, because it will require, yeah. So, but basically, think about it from electoral politics in Guyana. On the day of secret ballots, well, I don't know this other guy is going to vote, right? So I better just vote for me party, right? Because I perceive my interests might be better off, right? So what we need then is a cooperative arrangement, right? You need a constitution, and I'm going to close off, that enables and decreases cooperation and credible electoral threats from independence, right? This country got about 15%, 10%, perhaps 10, 15% of rabidly independent people who will like to be the spoilers, but they have no way of being spoilers, because the Constitution says you can only do coalitions when? Before the election. And you know why this was invented. You all know why this was inserted, right? It was inserted for precisely the reason you want to say, hey, you see the man? He in bed with them people, you know, right? I used to be involved in that. I could talk Guyana politics if you want. And what you need is a system that gets people not to build missiles. Let's cooperate. And it can be done. Don't worry with anybody who's looking at the fighting. Why is the PPP and the PNC, why are they fighting today? They're fighting because the Constitution incentivizes them to fight. They have to. It's a dog eat dog. If you don't fight the other side, you don't get anywhere. And you can't blame them, guys. You can't. The Constitution incentivizes them to do that, right? This is simple economics, right? So you have to decreate, right? And then we're going to have people like Raymond and Chris to challenge them, right? That if they don't do certain things. I might be sounding naive here tonight, thank you for coming, and it was a pleasure being here. Yeah.